Hello, this is James Barkell.
And it is wonderful to have your company here on the centre court.
You are listening to the Coach Doctor podcast.
Strikes it beautifully and it's down the middle.
In this podcast series, we discuss all things coaching and sports science.
Beats one, beats a couple, still going.
Each episode will feature prominent coaches on the front line of their sport.
Across to Mbappe.
And some of the world's leading academics who research what it takes to get the W.
All Blacks under big pressure again.
If there is an aspect of your coaching that needs some assistance, you can always count on the Coach Doctor to add life to your program.
Browning's having a terrific run. The first three to qualify. You betcha!
Welcome to the next episode of the Coach Doctor podcast. In this episode, I talked to Daryl Gibson. Daryl is a former New Zealand All Black and Super Rugby champion with the Canterbury Crusaders. More recently, Daryl has held the role as head coach of the New South Wales Waratahs before stepping down after a losing season. Daryl has gone on to research what elite teams do during a losing streak, and his findings are brilliant. Whilst there is a plethora of research into successful teams and cultures, the originality of Daryl's work looking at how to successfully cope with a losing streak will provide much insight for many coaches going through this difficult period. I hope you gain as much from this chat with Daryl as I did. Daryl, thanks so much for joining me on the Coach Doctor podcast today. Much appreciated. Just let me know where you are at the moment over in New Zealand.
I'm in the Bay of Plenty, halfway between Tauranga and Whakatane, looking out on White Island, which, or Whakaari, which was the one that erupted, and unfortunately, we had that tragedy a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that was just before COVID.
Beautiful spot. Since
returning to New Zealand, you're coaching Bay of Plenty?
I have. This season, I got involved with the local Bay team, the NPC team. In terms of rugby, I've been working for World Rugby in the coach development space. That's been excellent. Really enjoyed that role, and also with Fiji. So probably getting up to Europe, getting COVID, and really enjoying the Fijian culture and the team. So on the rugby side, really cool. Professionally, I have, after I left the TARS, it's almost 2 years ago now, I spent 6 months finishing my master's and writing my dissertation. And then during that COVID period, I went back into the classroom. So I went back relief teaching.
Okay.
That was a real experience. Learned plenty. And now I work in the government sector in education as well, in Māori education, where I work with iwi and their education plans. So got a million roles, million jobs, pretty busy, but I enjoy that. And it's been a really, really great journey and be able to keep learning.
Nice. So is your background in teaching originally?
Yeah, that's right. 25 years ago, I was a student teacher.
Yep.
And just in my last year of that, a 4-year degree, my last year rugby went professional. So I sort of guts that year out, got my phys ed teaching degree, secondary school. And then I was lucky enough, because rugby was in the very early days of professionalism, I sort of stayed and did a bit more at uni. I did a commerce degree, and then I did a master's in education at that time. And it became a bit of what I call a professional student. So I was playing rugby and doing uni. So I never thought I'd use my teaching degree. I know I'm a coach, but certainly getting back in the classroom, it's been fun. And I actually really enjoyed coaching at primary, or teaching at primary school level. So year 7, 8, about 10 or 11 the kids were.
Yeah.
Small little country schools, not cheeky enough to give you much of a hard time, and still fun where they can still have a joke with you without getting too serious. So
yeah, it's a good age.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah, nice. Just in terms of your coaching, you played 19 games for the All Blacks, and tell me if I'm wrong. I get this from Wikipedia, and I know Wikipedia can sometimes be wrong. 77 Super Rugby games for the Crusaders, plus a number of seasons in Europe. Were there any coaches or any systems that moulded you personally as a coach?
I think all of those experiences mould you as a coach. You're a product of your environment and your experiences that you've had. as a player and a coach, you tend to learn more from the poor coaches than you do from the really good ones. And I've been really lucky in my rugby experience to have played rugby in New Zealand, and then going to the UK and Australia. It's been really wonderful because you get to experience rugby in different countries. And as much as in New Zealand we think the game should be played the way it should be, in New Zealand and the philosophies that we have as players and coaches here, I think that's what taught me the most is I went to England and played for Leicester, who at the time boasted Martin Johnson, 8 of the England team that won 2003, really successful club. And what that taught me was you can play a completely different style of rugby and be really incredibly successful as long as everyone buys into that style. So I learned to appreciate to chase kicks, carry the ball hard, be physical. But as I said, every country is unique in the way rugby's played and rugby's coached in particular. So I'm very lucky for that experience.
All right. I think after that answer, I'm going to skip down. I've got a list of questions here. I'm going to skip down to a question that I had almost at the end, and I think this sort of ties into that answer you just gave me. In Australia, a large part of the rugby public believes that we should have Aussie coaches at Super Rugby and Wallaby level. Is there a difference in the culture of the Aussie and New Zealand rugby that foreign coaches might not understand, or do you still believe that New Zealand or any foreign coaches can work in the Australian system?
Oh, without doubt. You see foreign coaches operating all over the world. In the EPL, it's full of foreigners. So to answer your question, I think definitely as a coach, you adapt to the people that you're in front of. As a coach with Fiji, you can't coach the same way as you'd coach a New Zealand team or Australian team or an English team, because purely the culture is different. The people respond to different things, are motivated by different things. And so I always think in those situations, it's you who adapt to the players, not the players having to adapt to you. So if you're looking at a squad of 35 players and you carry that philosophy where, well, I'm the coach, this is the way I do it, and I'm going to do it a New Zealand way, you're asking 35 people to change the way that they are. And so I'm definitely the other way. And I think I learned that as a player. When you first go to England, and I always tell our players who go to England or go to somewhere different, listen, I want you to do one thing. For 3 months, do not say a word, or give yourself an uppercut if you ever hear these words come out of your mouth. This is how we do it back home. Because you're the one who needs to adapt to the team, not the team adapt to you. And I'm sure, these little tips and things that a player can give. I kind of think that's the same for a coach. You've got to pick up really clearly what the strengths of the culture are, what things are motivated. And if I look at Australia, I was incredibly impressed. The boys there are incredibly smart. They really think about their rugby. They love to train hard. They love to sweat. They love to feel like they've really got into work. And so if you look at those things as strengths, it's how do you harness those strengths into completing into a product that's really competitive and hard to beat? And those strengths are completely different to, say, the strengths of a Fijian player or a New Zealand player and so forth. So that's how I'd answer that question.
So I'm going to go back to, I guess, your start of your coaching career in Australia. At the Tars, I guess you had some wonderful highs, such as winning the 2014 Super Rugby title. Talk me through that season specifically and what made that season special.
Well, I was incredibly grateful to come to the Tars. I had seven years there, which is a long stint for most coaches. I was very lucky that firstly I got to experience coaching with a really fine operator in Czech. He was able to win in Europe, win Heineken, come win Super. There's not many coaches that have done that. And see a head coach operating. And probably with Czech, operating with a philosophy that is completely different in terms of what I'd experienced in New Zealand. We're all typically clones of Steve Hansen, Robbie Deans, or Wayne Smith. That's the model, the philosophy that we were brought up on. Whereas Czech, he comes at things from a completely different spectrum, but still really highly successful. So at the time, 2013, when I joined, the Tars had a fantastic squad. We had 35, a really top-notch roster. And I remember thinking to myself in 2012, wow, if you're going to do something with a squad, this is a squad to do it with, because it's full of talent, full of internationals, and just come off a losing season. So the motivation there to do well would be there. 2013, Czech whipped the boys into shape, got them fit, worked on all those gaps. And then so in 2014, the foundations had been laid in that previous year in the work. We brought in a couple of really key signings in Phipps. And I think everything was just right for that year. Remembering at some point we were 4-4, and then there's a couple of big wins. Teams create momentum, started riding a high, and we were away from that point. But magical. There's not many Australian teams that have managed to do and win Super Rugby. And there's a lot of factors that go into that win, of course. But very special, and still one of some great memories of some great people.
Did it mean more to you beating your old team, the Crusaders?
Yeah, it certainly did. Because as a player, I'd spent my whole time at Crusaders, 10 years, lots of seasons. I know exactly the culture that's created, the pride around successive teams being successful. And to do that in the fashion that we did, really special. And particularly, hanging on for the last 2 minutes in that game, Burnham kicks the goal. No, it's fantastic. Some great memories. But then also, I still think of the people on the other side and how they must be feeling, because they had a pretty special year as well.
Yeah. Well, I think they'd had their fair share of victories. I think they could do without one for a change.
And that was reminded me a few times where the Tars have been in a final against Crusaders twice and lost. So
yeah,
we're due one. So,
mate, I remember I was at Stadium Australia that day with my old man, and my old man he's a New South Wales Life member, and I don't think we'd ever seen the Waratahs win anything major in his life. In my life, I was almost 40. So it was a pretty special moment for us. So yeah, so thank you on behalf of my family. We really appreciated that victory.
And that was a special night. You think 61,000 was a record at the time, and the team really enjoys playing at Stadium Australia. I'm not sure what the name is now, but the pitch there was always fast. And we had, over the years, Tars had a really good record playing out there.
Yeah.
And so, just magic memories.
No, very good. Mate, following 2015 Rugby World Cup, a number of the players left the Waratahs to head to Europe or Japan, and that was probably the same year you were promoted to head coach. What was that transition like?
Yeah, it was difficult. I think we ended the season 8-8, so and we just missed out on playoffs. But it's probably the thing I learned out of that, going from assistant to a head coach, was when you take over a club, there are some really incredible things that need to be in place for you to be successful. While I inherited pretty much the bones of that 2014 squad, I know we lost quite a bit of experience. Probably the more telling thing was what was happening in the backroom office. Obviously, new CEO, new GM. We just had a lot of new coaching staff, new support staff. So it was pretty much a new build in behind the scenes. And with new builds, it just takes time to work out how you'll fit together. While on the playing side, there was a little bit of newness, but the remnants of the culture still existed. So that was probably my learning there. The alignment through a club that needs to be there from the board, head coach, CEO, captain, and coach critical. If those 5 guys are really stable, know what they're about, then I think you've got a real opportunity, and you've got enough talent in your team to win it. I think you've got the bones of being a really competitive club. For me, I was new, and as I said, there's too much new. And then, so that was my learning out of that year, and those learnings I still sort of carry forward now. And if I was to take on another sort of head coach role with a club, those would be the sort of questions I'd be guided by. You know, what's the stability of the club like in all those areas?
Yeah. Was there an expectation that the team would keep winning despite, I guess, all that newness?
Well, certainly I had that expectation. You know, there's no reason. I came from a team like the Crusaders. We're winning every year, and that success of winning was built up through really good culture, really good values, really good behaviours. And so, you know, I really thought we had an opportunity there to keep perpetuating that success. But as I said, it takes so many of those pieces of the big whole to be in place to really understand those things for that to continue through cycles. And so often, you know, you see with clubs, a head coach will come in for 3 years. A lot of the culture and legacy will leave with that coach. And I think that's the real challenge for every club. How do you keep winning through all those cycles of talent and coaching cycles? And that's, you know, you look at perhaps the Storm, the Roosters starting to get that real stability. So those top teams have that. It's really hard to get and probably pretty easy to lose if too many pieces fall.
You just mentioned the Roosters. Being so closely located, did you spend much time with Trent Robinson or other Roosters staff talking about coaching styles or strategies?
Yeah, I think obviously back in the SFS days, you know, we were side by side. Definitely there was a definite sharing. And that's probably the wonderful thing of being in Sydney. I think with, you know, the 8 professional teams in rugby league, you've got the 2 AFL teams, just a myriad of sort of coaches. Such a great network. And it's certainly, you know, when we talk later about my dissertation and my research project, calling on those networks and being able to get around those various teams, really advantageous. So, you know, you're in a real learning sort of hotspot. And I, for one, really took advantage of those relationships. You know, even Graham Arnold at Sydney FC tapped his brain a number of times. So pretty lucky.
Yeah, nice. Before we talk about your dissertation, and I can't remember if it was 2017 or 2018, I met you for the first time at the University of Sydney. You were doing the Masters of Sports Coaching course. And I was teaching, I think the subject from memory was elite athlete development. And I remember looking at the student list, and I saw your name, and I think, shit, I better know my stuff here. I mean, I got a super rugby coach. I'm a massive rugby fan. I need to make sure that I, you know, don't stuff this up and say the wrong thing, sort of thing. But I have to say, I was really impressed with your academic rigor and attention to detail in the course. And going back to what you said at the beginning, you've done a Bachelor of Education previously, and then you went on and did a Masters and some more degrees in commerce and stuff. So obviously you've got a bit of an academic background there anyway. What did you get out of doing that degree?
A great deal. I think, you know, I love learning. I love learning new things. I'm really curious about stuff, you know, how things work. The reason I started that paper was, you know, I didn't want to feel a hypocrite when I stood up in front of the team, because I'm a big advocate for making sure that your life after rugby is sorted. And, you know, often you'd stand up as a coach and say, hey, listen, you know, let's make sure that there's something else going on in your life, something where you can build self-esteem, set yourself up for that time when rugby's not the number one thing, and that you do have to get a real job. And so then I thought, well, you know what? 2/3 of our boys were doing formal education, so they were doing degrees of some sort, which is incredible. You know, the one real special thing about Australia is the fact that, or maybe the Tars, they had a real culture of making sure that was there. You know, and that's a blowback to, say, Phil Waugh and Tom Carter and guys who really put that in place. So, you know, when you have Tom Robinson doing a medical degree, most of the boys doing a Masters of some sort, I thought, you know what? If I'm going to preach that, I've got to get up and, you know, walk the talk. So I started doing a couple of papers every year. Reasoned if I was there for 4 years, 2 papers every year, I could probably handle that. And that brought me, into the course, into your class and so forth. And I think the course is really valuable because two fronts. It gave you the opportunity to learn theory, but then you could apply that straight away. And it really gave you an opportunity for networking. I think, as a coach, and I'm sure you've experienced this, often you go to coaching courses, it's not actually the content at times that's really the most thrilling thing. It's probably the opportunity to talk to other coaches and network and just talk, often around a beer. And those are where I think those coaching conversations are really critical. And being on the course, I was able to access, that all the time with coaches from the whole spectrum, beginning coaches, elite coaches, through the whole thing. So really valuable. I just think as a coach, you've got to continue to be learning, and what better way than to actually get a piece of paper at the end of it to say that you actually completed the course. So
Yeah,
it was a good achievement.
and I noticed you said earlier on you're still in touch with Donna in terms of bouncing some ideas I've heard. Is that something you still do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think all the people I met on course, Donna and all the other coaches. Just really valuable to have people with knowledge to be able to give you that sort of guiding steer. And I think if I look at all the coaches who I interviewed in my research, they all had mentors, they all had people that they could lean on at certain points to give them advice. And we're talking about, some elite coaches who've been coaching for 30 years. So I don't think that ever leaves you in terms of your mentors and wanting to learn.
Yeah. Daryl, so for that degree, I guess your final dissertation, you wrote a research paper titled "Leading While Losing: Elite Coaches' Perspectives of Losing Streaks." Firstly, why was this topic an area of interest for you?
That was pretty easy. In 2017 with the Tars, we had a really bad year, losing year. I think we might have finished close to the bottom. Had a number of losing streaks, and in that a losing streak, I've defined as 3 or more losses in a row. I think we had about 2 periods of 3 losses in a row. I can't remember the record exactly, but all I can remember about that year is just feeling quite helpless at times about what do you do in those situations. So I was really curious about how would other coaches have done things during what I'd faced in my experiences of losing and motivating a team and just having dealing with that situation. So I had that curiosity for a while. Whenever I sort of talk to a coach post that, I'd always sort of say, hey, what do you do post a game if you've lost? Or what do you do if you've lost 2 games? Or what have you lost when you actually lost 3? So I developed this real sort of morbid curiosity with teams at the top who are winning, but then also really curious about what are the coaches doing at the teams that aren't doing so well? What are they doing? And is there a really big difference between the effectiveness of, say, the top line coach and the coach who's dealing with a different situation? So then when I left the Tars, I had 6 months where I thought, right, here's my opportunity to actually do something. I was in Sydney. I had access to a lot of elite coaches, and that's where I went from there. The idea was born, the research formulated. I didn't realize how much work it was going to be. It was close on 2 years by the time, but it's been fantastic. It was probably more therapy for the coaches who were involved in the study because they unloaded on their experience. But then also it was probably therapy for myself around learning, being able to talk to a coach for 2 hours, about coaching. So it was therapy all around for all coaches.
So can you give me a brief overview of what the paper was about and I guess how it developed?
Yeah, so I looked at obviously losing situations, and I wanted to do 3 codes. So I did AFL, Super Rugby coaches or Rugby international coaches, and NRL coaches. And, I wanted to look at the elite. coaches who are professional, had been in for a while, and I was quite specific with what I wanted and who I wanted to talk to. I didn't want a team that was in transformation, in a process where losing was part of the process of becoming a winning side. So, if I look and think of someone like the Titans who had perennial years of losing, now really starting to get to it and coming out of that. So I avoided coaches like that. And I looked for teams that were supposed to win under a coach who was very experienced, but for some reason had a season where it wasn't working so well. So I studied people's records, and then I approached my coaches. And, I probably approached 18 to 20 coaches. Thankfully, 12 said yes. And it was probably more telling the coaches that didn't agree, because it probably said more about them around where they were at, around their growth mindset and having a fixed mindset. And it spoke volumes for the people who put their hand up and said, I'd love to talk to you. I've got lots of stuff. And as I said, it became therapy in terms of that for the coach and their research. So, that's where it came.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, how open were the coaches to discussing losing streaks? So I guess from your answer, the ones that agreed were pretty open, and obviously the ones who didn't agree to participate in the study weren't open at all. But was it something that was difficult, I guess, for coaches to talk about initially? Because it's easy to talk about success, but talking about, losing is quite difficult.
Absolutely. Yeah, and talking about failure, and that's probably why, James, there's not a lot of research on this stuff. No one really writes a book on failure, and this is what a losing coach does. And when I did my research, I couldn't find anything. That was the thing. There's plenty of stuff on how you win, and the serial winning coaches and coach like this and so forth, but there's not much research or literature on, hey, when the shit hits the fan, and you're 0-6 and the media are on you, you're being hounded, your team stinks, you're getting abuse. No one prepares you for that situation. Nor is there a manual or somewhere where you can go and consult and go, holy shit, what do you do in these situations? I've got this going on. And so when coaches had the opportunity, and as I said, it took the special type of coach to go, I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to read your results and the findings once you've done it. Because, those coaches, they're lifelong learners. They wanted to reflect, they want to learn more, they want to get better in their coaching practice. And so that's what struck me. And so as soon as I turned that recorder on and we went, I just let it go to where they wanted to go, and they talked about what they wanted to talk about. I was really lucky to get an insight into some stuff that, as you say, pretty raw for a lot of the coaches. And for a lot of them, it was career defining, those moments. It changed their careers, it changed how they coached. And obviously they came through it for the positive. And we can all benefit from their wisdom.
Yeah. You just mentioned it changed how they coached. Was that one of the things that you discovered, that when you're in a losing streak or you're in a losing situation, you start trying to find solutions and you change things that you might not necessarily want to change, but you think, I've got to find an answer to the solution and change it? Yeah,
I guess there is those examples, that sort of knee-jerk reactive. You get reactive as opposed to being proactive, because you've set up your environment to withstand adversity or failure, because it's just part of the journey, and you've got lots of little levers in your coaching toolbox that you can pull. I think the coaches that got in trouble and didn't come through it, they said they ended up being reactive. They hadn't set up the team well enough to be able to cope with that. And then also on that personal front, around how they regulated themselves to be able to cope with that situation, so they're at their best and able to lead really well.
Yeah. And you just mentioned it, but I guess one of the things when I was reading your paper that really struck me was the fact that there are so many resources and books that describe winning cultures, peak performance, how to be a winning team. And there's a lot of literature around successful cultures and successful environments, but you could find no literature around losing teams. So are losing teams doing anything realistically that different to winning teams in terms of the way they're programming or the way they're going about their business?
Good question. There's, losing's just not sexy. People want to read about winners. What's the blueprint to success? That's what we all seek. But often, I think you ask anyone, you get more lessons from failing than you do from necessarily winning, because winning doesn't tell you a lot. It tells you you're winning. Whereas when you lose, you blowtorch everything. You have that real sort of minute micro approach. And so, I guess, is there much margin? Probably not. I think if there are the extremes, and the normal distribution, because for some reason, when you get a group of humans together, it's a very complex dynamic situation. And for whatever reasons, that particular group wasn't a very good team. And that does happen. And I think overall, when I look at losing streaks and the situations that the coaches faced, they're incredibly complex and incredibly contextual. So there's no one losing streak that is the same, because you're dealing with such different variables in each situation. There are some real commonalities, though, around the mistakes that the coaches made and then could trace back in their losing streak or their losing season that they got wrong. And usually they got it wrong at the start of the season, that period where they were establishing the team and setting up the environment, because that's your opportunity to embed your blueprint, your imprint of success, your vision, your values, your behaviors, all those neat, sort of purpose, how we're going to do things, how we're going to team together, all those things you do at the start. And the coaches in the study saw errors in the way that they did that, the way they facilitated. And so there's some real lessons in that, I think, to establishing really robust teams that can respond really well when adversity strikes. And I think the serial winning coaches, like say Craig Bellamy, who in 5 or 6 years, I don't think he's lost more than 2 games in a season. So it's an incredible record. And he's done that through losing, some talented players out of his roster. So his environments and what he sets up, there's got to be some stuff in there that we can all learn from. And I think it's those sort of keys are really important. And I know your next question you're going to ask me, what are those lessons and what are the things that coaches can sort of set up in the sort of team foundation stage to make their team really robust?
Yeah.
So number one, I think every coach got to start out with a failure plan. So as coaches, we all start out with, hey, this is my plan A. It's wonderful. This is our culture. This is our vision. This is our values. But the really good coaches start out with the what ifs. What are our vulnerabilities? What are our weaknesses? What's plan B? What's plan C? What's plan D? What are the what ifs if we lose? What are the what ifs if I win my first 3? It's really that depth of detail in the plan. They've really thought about what are the most consistent systems and procedures I can put in place to firstly prepare the team during the week in terms of our preparation plan, our setup meetings, all that sort of stuff. But more importantly, what are the accountabilities post-performance that I'm going to do consistently to create the accountability in my players for their performance? And those coaches who have got really strong pre and post procedures, handle those really well. How they do that is they have really, really good data that's linked to the team purpose. This is what we're chasing. These are our KPIs. These are our performance indicators that we know we're on the right track, even though we've lost, because the loss tells us that we are getting closer to the thing that we all said and bought into that we wanted to become, because we believe that is the secret to our success and the outcomes we're chasing. So they had evidence to be able to put in front of their players to say, hey, you're accountable for this part of the game. Here's the data that supports that. Here's your contribution to it. So they had those levers in place. A lot of the coaches that came unstuck didn't have those things. They weren't consistent. They'd forgotten about them. Just hadn't thought that, geez, what if we lose? What am I going to do? What am I going to say to the media? So all the crisis plans, all that sort of stuff. The elite coaches who came through the losing streaks had that stuff down pat. Probably the other major thing, and this is what I found quite important, was the coach, if they choose to use an outside provider or if they choose to facilitate it themselves, it's getting that buy-in and commitment to the thing that the team is about, the team purpose, the vision, these are our values, these are our behaviors, and so forth. Getting that, number one, that buy-in, and doing that in a really robust way, that every person on that team has ownership in the process, but then also has a voice, whether they agree, disagree. So that process is really robust, because my experiences in listening to the coaches, it's that experience where your commitment can be measured by how committed that you are to being as good as you can be, the best version of yourself, your best DNA. Because often, if that buy-in process isn't great and you've lost your first 4 games, that's going to be tested. Because it's very easy for people and as humans to go, well, that wasn't my plan. That was the coach's plan or the CEO's plan, or it wasn't mine. You lessen your responsibility in that. And so that's why that buy-in process is really important. I guess probably one of the things I read quite recently was a really good article on serial winning coaches. And one of the research findings out of that, which, linked to what I was talking about there in the buy-in, was serial winning coaches are very good at leading that buy-in, the team purpose, every day. They are tapping into it. They are putting that vision front and center of who we are. These are the things that we're going to do to be continually improving as a team, and this is your part within it. I'm going to keep shining the spotlight on you, on everything, and keeping everyone accountable towards that. And for me as a coach, I look at myself and I go, well, that's the area that I've got to improve in. And doing that is tough. It's every day. You've got to drive that. And when I think of my coaches that I had during my career, I think of Chick, I think of Wayne Smith, Steve Hansen. They were masters at that stuff, that accountability. So there's a little bit of gold in that. The other thing too there was creating that real strong personal meaning. So the team means something to you in a personal way. I know it's really trendy at the moment. Everyone knowing their why. It seems like every player's got something written on their tape, on their wristband, but it means something to them. And if you can create a really strong sense of that, when things go bad, that's going to be called on, because those players will, because it means something to them, they're committed, the motivation for them to do better, to persist longer, to hang in, be a good teammate is going to be greater. And then I guess you look at the sort of master motivational sort of climates. Obviously, the All Blacks are a great example of that. I'm not going to bore you too much on the literature on that stuff, but
No, get into the literature.
No, master motivational climates. Google it. There's heaps of stuff on it, and heaps of examples. So as a coach, we want to try and set up those sort of environments where losing is just part of the journey. It's part of the way that gives us feedback, reveals our gaps, part of the improvement process. Allied to that is making sure that somewhere in our values in our team, there needs to be accountability, responsibility, and ownership. Somewhere in your core fabric, because the opposite of that is blame, excuses, and denial. So you have a choice. Do I want to be a victim culture, or do I want my culture to be one of champions that respond with champion type values, which is accountability, taking responsibility for your performance, and really owning any role that you're given on the team, whether you're team captain or you're responsible for picking up the bags or whatever. So those are the lessons. Plenty there, but I think overall, if a coach can put those levers in place before the season begins and has a really clear idea of the culture and environment, that win, lose or draw, I've got a culture that can withstand any type of adversity and will pull together off the back of that.
So it's about being really well planned or planning for anything to occur. Is that
absolutely? Yeah. And when those things occur, instead of being reactive, you have already proactively put things in place. For example, at the start of a meeting, I am always going to start my meeting with humor and fun, which, obviously players these days, that's a number one prerequisite. They want to be connected. They want to enjoy what they do. So, the start of every team meeting, win, lose or draw, and this is the hard thing, we're going to start that way. I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to start the day with, say, a gratitude statement. I'm going to, every Monday morning, win, lose or draw, I'm going to start with, the 2 or 3 things I'm grateful for. I'm going to share that with my teammate. So you're putting in techniques and strategies that you've thought about beforehand to, again, be the antidote to whatever's coming. For instance, when I can talk about this a bit later in the during phase, but Rosabeth Moss-Cantor, who's probably the seminal sort of expert Harvard lady, did a wonderful book on winning and losing streaks in the corporate and sporting environment. She talks about the 9 pathologies of losing. So losing responses or loser behavior that you'll see in any team and in any corporate environment. And one of them is obviously isolation. We withdraw as people, we feel less socially connected. So as coaches, you go, okay, we've all been in those teams where things haven't gone great, and people move away, they don't really want to socialize. So smart coaches would, in your plan, you'd have, planned social events that are going to happen again, win, lose or draw. We're going to do them. We're going to go 10-pin bowling. We're going paintballing. We're having a party, but it's in the diary. It's in the plan. We're just working the plan.
So in the plan, win, lose or draw, you've got your social aspects in your calendar set out. You don't deviate from that plan around building team identity, and you keep the athletes involved in this as much as possible. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if we sort of look at, that during, so I did the study in 3 sort of phases. I did the pre-streak stuff. So what were the coaches doing before their losing period or losing streak? What did they do during it? And then what did they reflect on? What were their post reflections on that, and what they learn and what they change? So I did it in those tidy little 3 sections. During that, during sort of phase, as I said to you earlier, losing, it's really contextual. Part of the diagnosis of your own problems inside your own team is getting that really correct. So identifying, hey, what's really going on here inside my team? What's up with the team dynamic? I'm noticing these behaviors, the team's not connected. What's really going on? And looking beneath the surface, because often the coaches in the study would talk about, I thought, this was the issue, but it wasn't really the issue. The issue was something else. And so often the remedy to the or diagnosis and the remedy weren't aligned. And that's what I was saying to you. Losing is incredibly contextual and unique. So getting that right and having your antenna, your radar, your thermometer on the team environment really tuned in, so you know what's going on, really important. And so often, in terms of some of the losing streaks, are often through to things that aren't physically related. We weren't fit enough. We weren't. Our game style was incorrect. We got the strategy wrong, tactics, whatever. It's often a team dynamic issue. So if I look at my own experience, 2019 with Israel Folau, that was an off-field contextual issue. Had nothing to do with X's and O's and how we were running our environment. So those sort of things can be a derailer, and there was a number of coaches in the study who had those situations. And it was, how do you repair the team dynamic? What are you doing there to deal with very human and complex behaviours? So there's those situations. And then, as I say, it's dealing with often our responses to losing as humans. And so, as I said, there's 9 sort of pathologies that Cantor talks about that you will see in a losing situation. I can't rattle them off the top of my head, but blame, excuses, denial, criticism increases, withdrawal, silo mentality. We congregate in small groups and we bitch about the leader. Criticism, respect decreases, isolation. Probably the biggest one for the coaches in the study was their response was to often work harder. As a coach, bury yourself in the work, micromanage your staff, work to crazy hours, run yourself into the ground, when often the response you're looking for is to do less, get out of your office, connect more with people, put your laptop down, and really look at your team dynamic and really look at what's really going on inside the team. So it's the ability of the coach to be able to preempt those losing responses and preempt them by putting as many levers or tools or strategies, or think about it. Hey, what am I going to do if the team reacts poorly? And I can see silo mentalities start to occur. I can see small groups. I can see a divide, a rift, inequity. How am I going to deal with that? And probably one of the most interesting sort of insights into the study was the realization that in those times, the more honest a coach can be, it actually builds confidence than destroys it. Because often as coaches, we think if we're honest with our team and really confront the brutal reality of our performance, interrogate it, bring home some home truths based on evidence, of course, that you'll destroy that really delicate morale that you think, the self-esteem of a team can't handle. But the reality is you need to go there. You need to be incredibly confronting to the facts, and then show the team the way out. This is what we've got to do. This is the solution based on, this is my assessment of what's going on. And by doing that, the coaches who came out of it gain confidence because you're willing to go there. And that's a tough thing when you're in it. Imagine if you're 0-8 and you're, or you think morale's at an all-time low, and you're going to heap more on top of that, But it's probably because you haven't been honest with your team at the start. It's probably got you into that situation. So honesty for me is a key trait.
Yeah, no, that's some really, really interesting information, and I think some really key points there. So I just want to quickly go back and just clarify, just in case I'm getting it wrong. Would you say in those losing streaks as a coach, it's more important to go back and connect with the playing group and ensure that there's, I guess, a strong commitment within the playing group before you even worry about the performance, or is it all intertwined? Is it?
Yeah, I think it is, because if you've got really strong buy-in, really strong commitment, your team's going to respond in a really positive way to adversity. And that's why I'm saying it's really important what you put into the team environment before losing occurs, rather than retrospectively trying to add those levers, because there's a bit of a knee-jerk reactionary approach to losing. So that's the importance of making sure that, hey, our environment is going to operate like this. It's going to have these levers of accountability, which are incredibly important for a coach. You know, I look at my coaches that I had, best ones hold you to the count the best. You know, you're accountable 24/7. And if those ingredients are missing, it makes it really hard to have those honest conversations, because you probably don't have the evidence or the data that supports the performance, which is based on the team purpose or values, to firstly have that conversation, coaching conversation. And then, we're going temp and bowling. You know, that's reactive, as opposed to, no, connection's really important to our team, having fun. And so we're going to do that all the time. And the teams that have thought about that, have got that in their team, you know, tend to respond really well.
Yeah, okay. So you set those standards really early. These are the standards, win, lose or draw, week in, week out, that we're going to hold ourselves to. And when things start going poorly, we're still going to hold ourselves to those standards.
Absolutely. And I guess also allied to that is the approach of the coach, you know. So part of when you're in it is obviously regulating your own self, because you don't want to be too low with losses and you don't want to be too high with winning. You want to be somewhere in the middle, you know, indifferent with winning or losing, you know. I know that sounds unemotional, but if you're going to survive as a coach, then you've got to make sure that you're looking after yourself, you know. So you've got lots of good support systems already in place, you know, the things that you know you need to do as a coach to be at your best, whether it's meditation or playing golf or movie nights or date nights or whatever it is. So you've firstly got a really good handle on yourself. And then also a really high personal awareness around your own body language. So making sure that, you know, one of the coaches said, you don't want to be too low that you've come to work with a piano strapped to your back, you know. So, and that you're hopeful and you're optimistic in your approach. And I think that was probably one of the things that came through really clearly. Even though the coaches had those feelings of self-doubt, things were overwhelming, they felt helpless, they still believed that they would get through it. And they were hopeful around how they were going to do that. So, you know, then they used lots of classical techniques, you know, like cognitive reframing, looking for the opportunity in the crisis, all those sort of good things you'd hope for.
Yeah.
But yeah, so really tough, because, you know, if I look at losing streaks, it's tough on the leader. You know, you're under incredible scrutiny, particularly if you're in a really high public role, you know, in charge of a team that's supposed to be winning. The media are on you, you know, all those sort of things. You're really going to have a good sense of yourself and what you're about to get through it.
Do you wish you'd known what you know now back then?
100%. I do. But it's like anything. You until you've experienced something, you don't truly, you know how you're going to react and respond to those situations. And I guess that's why, you know, the coaches in the study have got to where they've got to. The pinnacle of their sports, you know, been coaching 20 plus years, a lot of them, highly successful. And the reason they're highly successful is they've really got that, learn from their mistakes, really reflect on their coaching practice, and as a leader, how do I get better? Really open to feedback, and really inquisitive. So to answer your question, but I'm still making plenty of mistakes. And as I said to you, probably one of the learnings for me this year would be around the ability of the coach to keep the team's purpose front and center every day.
It's easy to
lots of different ways. Yeah,
it's easy to forget that, isn't it? I mean, I was talking with Gina, who I know you know as well, about that in terms of facilitating that those core values. We can, in coaching, and I don't know about at that elite level, but the sort of community level, we might come out with some of those core values and some of the behaviours that we want to set, and we talk about them initially at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the season, and then once we're into the season, it's more about the technical, tactical stuff, and we sort of forget about it, and we don't even talk about it again. So,
absolutely, and I think you hit it on the head. We put so much into that foundation stage. That's just the beginning, isn't it? The real gold is keeping people accountable to those things in their performance and their behaviours daily, and connected to the team and all those sort of things. So, as you say, I've grown a real appreciation for those coaches who've got those skills, because it's not easy. And if we were all winning, it would be easy, right? So
it would be, and unfortunately, only one team can win in the season. Does that mean everybody else has failed, or how do we how do we measure failure at the end?
That's right. There's degrees of success, and what is it? What success for us? All those questions. Yeah. But as you say, if you're in a 16-team comp, there's going to be teams who are 8-8, middle of the road. Have they been successful? Has their coach been effective? And there's those coaches who are down the bottom. So are they any less effective than those coaches at the top? And I guess the real test I look for in coaches are the ones who have taken perhaps an average talented team and created something beyond. There's some of their parts is greater than the whole, and you look for that as a coach. And I guess that's a real test of being a really effective coach.
In a city like Sydney, you've got so much competition from the NRL clubs, a couple of AFL and A-League clubs, all vying for club support. When you're winning, the fans and the media tend to love you, but when you're losing, they tend to call for the axe. So how do you deal with the scrutiny from the media or the fans on social media?
Yeah, well, I guess it's all part of it. It's, it's just how much you want to be affected by that. As I said, I think it'd be bloody tough. There's no doubt about that. But I think if you've got all those things in place around you, I think that'll go a long way in making sure that you regulate and manage yourself well. There's so many things. You've got to have your team around the team around yourself, all those sort of support systems, really good mentors that you can call on and get advice when you need it. And those coaches who came through it, they had those things in place. They had people who would tell them the truth. The first people they looked at were themselves in terms of, I'm responsible for this pile of poo. How am I going to get myself out of it? How am I going to lead the team through it? And often having that mentor give it to you straight sets you on the right path to finding that solution and getting the team on the right path and responding well.
I just want to say I really applaud you for coming on to the podcast. And as you said, it's really easy to talk about, a successful season and success in coaching, but it's quite hard to talk about, the failure, and it's hard to talk about a losing season. And the fact that you've shown that growth mindset, gone out and actually researched and learnt, as much as you can to help both yourself, and it's also going to help a heap of other coaches out there, is awesome. And
Yeah,
there's not many people that would have done that.
No, and that was my motivation because, when I was in it, it wasn't great. And if I can do something to help other coaches around, because, sooner or later, everyone's going to have a losing season. We've all worn the face of a loser at some point. And, at different times, you'll look for different material, what are the solutions? And so if in any small way I can provide some of the lessons, I really think I'm doing my bit for coaches and coach development and all those sort of things. So, because I don't really like seeing coaches who are under the pump and on the back papers and sometimes on the front page, because their team isn't performing very well. And unfortunately, getting sacked is just part of the lot that goes with being a coach and the consequences of underperformance. But if in any small way that I can help coaches, avoid that scenario, and they get something out of it, then I reckon that's really neat.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great attribute to you that you've gone that mile to do that and try to help other coaches and not just yourself, and put it out there into the public forum. That's really, really admirable, mate. We'll finish off. I know that we've been on for a little while, but I'll keep you to one last question, and we'll try and make it a little bit more positive around what you're doing now with your coaching. You're now with Fiji. Tell me a little bit about that role. And I guess Fiji is a nation that tends to be, on the up. 2019 World Cup, they had some great performances, almost knocked off the Wallabies. How's that going?
Oh, I love it. And the reason I love it is because of all the stuff that we've just talked about, around culture and setting things up, and these are the values. The thing that I've been struck by with Fiji, and there's not many teams in the world, they are uniquely Fijian because their value set, their faith, the way they conduct themselves, their behaviour is all rooted in being Fijian. This is how we are as a culture, and they've got a really strong sense of that. And that's really neat to watch, because your job then as a coach is, I'm a coach. I can clearly see there's some real strengths to this culture. And so your job becomes, how do we reinforce the best parts of that culture, but then also how do we coach these boys, both in terms of their strengths, but then also in those deficits and the gaps that they need to overcome to become truly the best. And I think every coach that's taken on Fiji has probably seen those things around incredible strengths, but how do they, get more of that and less of the other stuff? But in terms of coach culture, incredibly happy people, just beautiful souls, and just a real pleasure to be part of and part of the coaching setup there.
Thanks so much for joining me today, mate. I really appreciate you giving us over an hour of your time, and I know you've got your family there in the background, so I know it's important to put some time into the family, mate. So thank you so much. And just one other quick thing, I noticed that while you were at the Waratahs, you were always really giving of your time as well. You'd come out and you did a jersey presentation for a little under 12s team that I was coaching. You were always happy to have a chat about coaching. I remember at one of the PWSA tournaments, you were there doing some coach ed. You were always helped out with Gen Blue programs with the young sort of representative stuff. So, mate, again, really, I think that's a really admirable attribute, because there's a lot of coaches out there that, it's all about the top team, and other than that, they don't really focus too much on anything else. But you're always there to help out the community grassroots levels of football, so rugby. So I just think that's an important thing to note as well before I let you go.
Awesome. I think it's our responsibility as lovers of rugby that we do our part, regardless of what level we're at. I think our game exists on volunteers, and the volunteer coach, people at clubs and so forth. So we're all responsible. It's the game we love, and we've all got our challenges in the different parts of the world to make sure that our game is as strong as ever. So we're all part of that, and I see my responsibility in that and just helping out. So very lucky, very fortunate to be involved in the game.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Daryl, and appreciate your time, and all the best with all your rugby back in NZ and work in NZ and with the Fijian team.
Thanks, mate.
Some of the key takeaways from this conversation were that there is no one losing streak that is the same. Each situation has its own individual differences. However, there are commonalities around the mistakes that coaches make during these losing streaks. It is important to establish a team identity and keep revisiting it throughout the season, and set up some plans for when adversity strikes. Planning for adversity requires setting up a failure plan. What do we do in the event of a loss? How do we talk to the team? How do we address the media? And how do we address failure? This includes consistency in analysis and interpretation of a loss. Complete buy-in from all members of the team is also vital, so that all can be accountable rather than turning to blame, which often happens in a losing streak. The best coaches revisit their purpose and buy in on a daily basis. Having personal meaning within the team is also important, so when things go bad, that personal meaning will be called upon. Do we want to be a victim culture or have a champion culture that responds to adversity by owning your role on the team? During losing streaks, some common responses tend to be blame, excuses, denial, criticism increases, withdrawal from the team or the group, isolation, a silo mentality, loss of respect, and a belief of the coach that they have to work harder, when in reality they should be looking more closely at the relationships within the team. If you'd like more information on Daryl's research, you can email me at james@thecoachdoctor.com.au. In the meantime, thanks so much for listening to this episode. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please take the time to like it and give a short review, and also follow me on Instagram at thecoachdr for more podcast news, coaching tips and advice, all based on the latest research.